Hi everyone, my name is Joseph and welcome to Digimon Seekers Chapter 3 Part 10 Unit 11 Digital Missing in Action. So let's go ahead and get into the first quote. Logomon, meanwhile, entertained their guests. Thankfully, said guest is well versed in the digital world and knew how to handle conversing with the hollow-eyed Digimon. Thanks for sticking around until I could. Wow, my place is a mess. Sorry about that, EG muttered, scrubbing his head dry with the towel as he sat down. Don't worry about it. My place, excuse me everyone, you guys could hear scraping in the background. That's my other cat. He's using the litter box, so I'm not sure if one is able to hear that. So let me continue. EG muttered, scrubbing his head dry with the towel as he sat down. Don't worry about it. My place doesn't look much different, the man replied, the man being Koski. EG let out a massive sigh. Days worth of anguish forcing its way out of him. And it's a bit late to be saying this, but sorry for barging in here unannounced. The man took a sip from his canned coffee. He looked supremely relaxed and at ease, and EG found himself strangely relaxed as well. So what I like about this quote is just how it humanizes Koski. So far, what I really appreciate about the characterization being done with Koski is that despite being the leader of an organization, and I would argue a well respected leader within this organization, he is very much down to earth. He seems like he is not out of his element, or rather, his head is in the clouds, not out of his element, but essentially he's not arrogant. He seems to know how to communicate with other individuals, and I think that's really cool. The fact that EG apologizes for the messiness of his room, but then Koski, he could have just said, no, it's fine, I came unannounced, it's not your fault, right? But rather, Koski says that, but also includes, oh, but my place looks similar to this, so you don't have to be too concerned about this, right? Personally, I just really like that. I think it adds a little bit more weight to the dialogue. A really good example about this would be if anyone's ever seen Deadwood, more specifically Deadwood the movie. There's a specific scene where a character says that a random character, just a no-name character, says about the antagonists. I won't say the antagonist's name for spoilers, but essentially they say, I hope you die. And an alleyway, really strong line, right? Obviously emphasizing that this random character doesn't like the antagonist. But what the movie does is that after he states this line, he includes the way my dad died. And that additional little detail, I hope you die in an alleyway, the way that my dad died, that just makes it a lot more personal. This random character despises the antagonist so much so that he's wishing upon him a personal incident that they probably got a lot of joy from, unfortunately, right? They probably didn't have a positive relationship with their father. Yet, despite this, they really want to make sure that the antagonist suffers as much as their own dad, right? So, again, I hope you die in an alleyway. That really does indicate that one is not liked, but to also include the way that my dad died, that it makes it a lot more personal. So, I feel like that's what's going on right here. EG apologizes for the state of his apartment. And then Koski says, my place doesn't look, rather, don't worry about it. My place doesn't look much different. And then beyond that, what I also like is how he further apologizes for coming in unannounced, just barging in unexpectedly. Koski seems to be a very well-mannered individual. It makes a lot of sense why Asaya would be attracted to him and why he was able to work so well with the professor, Yolene, and Saya, because he seems to be quite charismatic. So continuing forward, hey, that's the raggedy Digimon we met in the Wasp slum, Logomon barked. This is after Koski hollow-eyes Doromon. The Digimon before them was the one who tasked them with mapping the ninth district as an entrance exam of sorts for the SOC. They removed their rags to reveal a bushy tail and small wings protruding from their back. They were a rookie Digimon about the same size as Logomon. My name is Doromon, I'm not raggedy. This is my friend and partner Digimon, Todoroki said by way of introduction. The three-man apartment was beginning to feel quite cramped with two people and two Digimon now sitting inside. Wait, no, hang on. You're the interviewer, Ichi yelped, pointing directly at Todoroki. The interviewer you met at the start of all this is Todoroki's other avatar, Doromon confirmed. Only a handful of people were supposed to know about that little entrance exam, so even if he was lying about Todoroki, about being Todoroki, he was at least pretty high up in the SOC. So with this quote, what I appreciate about it is specifically, so I'm not going to lie, this is a very small element, but I really do love it when Digimon as a property emphasizes how Digimon are not just pets or lesser than humans, but rather they're equal to humans. And I love how Kosuke introduces Doraemon. This is my friend and partner Digimon. So I'm gonna be completely honest. It's mainly because of that line that I wanted to share this with everyone else. But I didn't want it to just be that line by itself out of context because I think it would not have that same impact. When taken as a whole, I think it really adds a lot to the scene. The way that Logomon, he's such an interesting character. I would argue he is respectful towards other individuals, but he's also quite kooky, or rather, he likes to act brashly at times. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that I don't think Logomon's a rude character, but he does have a tendency to say what's on his mind, essentially almost like without a filter. So I love how he says that you're the raggedy Digimon we met in the Wasp Slum. I should say raggedy Digimon. He could have said, hey, you were the Digimon who was wearing raggedy clothes, right? That at least implies that, well, one was wearing not a costume, sorry, a disguise of some sort, but rather by saying raggedy Digimon, he's calling Doraemon directly raggedy. So Doraemon's response, my name is Doraemon, and I'm not raggedy. I think that's really cute, adorable, and adds further interaction between Logomon interacting with another Digimon. So far, up to this point, we've only seen him battle other Digimon and only speak with Postmon in a conversational setting. Right now, we have Doraemon as well. And I think it's really cool so far. And I already talked about the introduction. I love how Kosuke says, "This is my friend and partner Digimon." I think it would have been just as easy to say, "This is my partner Digimon and my friend," but I think it's really telling that friend is brought up before partner Digimon. This is one of those instances where I wish I could see the original translation, not because I think the translation is bad, but rather I love to see the diction, the wording of the original. Do they list friend first over partner? And if it does, I think that's really strong textual evidence to suggest that Kosuke treats Digimon as equals. Again, I think that will make a lot of sense why he's working with the professor, because again, I would argue the professor seems to have that same mindset that Digimon are not just tools, they're not just inferior beings, but rather their own little set of culture, identity, and personalities. They're sapient, right? So yeah, I really do like that line. If I could see the original to confirm that friend comes first, it will make me love that line. And then pointing out that Todorus essentially has multiple avatars. So that's really an interesting detail, the last part. The interviewer you met at the start of all this is Todorus' other avatar. For some reason, I always thought that Digimon could use disguises, but I never really thought of the humans being able to use different avatars. But I suppose that would make a lot of sense, right? I mean, in real life, you have multiple personalities within social media. When I say multiple personalities, I mean like multiple usernames. For example, one has PSN, Xbox Live, Steam, Nintendo Switch Online, and so forth. One is going to have to utilize a name, and also depending on the service, you might also be able to customize your appearance, right? For example, this is true. Well, at least it used to be true with Xbox with their I think they're just called avatars, right? And then with Nintendo's with their Mii's. Sony's the only one that's ever really utilized that. But a really more great example would be MMOs, where you could have the same name across different properties like the Old Republic, Guild Wars 1, and Guild Wars 2, but the characters are not going to look the same. So I think I never really thought about that, and I think that's a cool little detail to include, that the human operators are able to change their appearances when they're in the digital world as well. Yeah. Continuing forward. Also, excuse me, this is a bit of a longer quote, but it's only long because, like with the previous one, I don't want to take things out of context. Okay, so why? Ig asked. Why would Todorus, the legendary code cracker, bother with overseeing my interview? I couldn't think of one reason. You knew why I was trying to get into the SOC in the first place. Todorus must have known about Professor Rusenji's directive. It was the only way Ig could make it make sense. Huh. Marvin was right on the money about you. You feign ignorance, but you're observant where it counts, Doraemon said approvingly. He said, what? Ig swung his head around to look at Doraemon. Exactly right. We know you're Professor Rusenji's spies. Come to see what you can't find out about the SOC, Doraemon continued, brushing Iggy's question aside. And you led us into the SOC anyway? Iggy asked, a little uncertain if he should direct his question to the man drinking coffee before him or the Digimon beside him. Well, we needed your muscle for one. I mean, you saved Martin's life during the attack on the X Nation's data servers, which I would like to once again thank you for. Yeah, no problem. You're rude, but polite where it counts, Logomon said, reprising Doromon. All this is to say that we knew we could trust you precisely because you were the professor's little spies. If a cold cracker was good enough for if a cold cracker was good enough for Professor Ruzenji, they were good enough for the SOC. Wow, cold cracking teams and Digimon respect the professor's instincts. No wonder they had welcomed him into the upper ranks so quickly, despite his inexperience and lack of accomplishments. So originally, the line that I really wanted to focus on was if a code cracker was good enough for Professor Rusenji, they were good enough for the SOC. But I also wanted to read the beginning part as well, and I realized that I think these two passages go hand in hand. So that's why I decided to read it as one whole unit. So I want to focus on the first portion, where I started reading from. So I love how, so as always, I mentioned this. So many characters, EG himself, highlight that he's a quote-unquote stupid individual. But as always, the narration tells us that that's not necessarily true. Superficially, it may seem like that's a detail about EG, but when you get to know EG, that's actually just a superficial detail. It's not true about his personality. And I really love how EG almost right away was able to pick up on the fact that he's been discovered. He's been discovered essentially. I said oops because I usually have everything highlighted. I accidentally unhighlighted it in my quote, but it's fine. I know where it's at. He's been discovered. And we saw in the previous part how he did his best to keep his secret, a secret. But in here, he has no qualms of essentially revealing himself. And I think this really demonstrates how astute that he is, that he's able to pick up on details. And I think it's quite true. I wish I had mentioned this when E.G. I first worked with Tartarus for Operation, what was it called? Midnight Operation Infinity. When they went to attack the Machine Digimon in the first place. But I did find it quite interesting that right away, despite being a new member, EG was working with the higher-ups. I assume it was because of the mind link capacity or aspect, but in that part where there was no name mind linkers as well, I came to realize, oh, wow, so there's multiple people who are working with partner Digimon. And now getting this detail makes a lot more sense why he was working with the higher-ups. It's because Tartarus, and more than likely Marvin, everyone was aware that he being EG was sent by the professor. And if he's being sent by the professor, well, then obviously EG is a capable individual. And yeah, so I just think it's really awesome that they're not tippy-toeing around the fact that EG knows something is up, but rather they direct it, they confront the issue head on. I think that says a lot about the writing, that they do respect the audience's time. And I'm hopeful that as we continue, I'll have a final conclusion once I have the whole text in front of me. But I said this once before already, or maybe a couple of times, but I am quite impressed with the writing so far, and I'm hopeful that this kind of style continues, this kind of quality continues. Anyway, but let me look at my quote. So yeah, Marvin was right on the money about you. You feign ignorance, but you're observant where it counts. Again, I just really like that comment. So going to the second part of this quote, once again, I do appreciate how Doromon, and I think if Doromon didn't say anything, Kosuke would have thanked EG again. But the way that they're really emphasizing how he worked as a team member, how he assisted Marvin, and it was because of EG that Marvin was able to be rescued. For me, that just really emphasizes how it's not just Kosuke, but also his partner, how they emphasize community. And it's because of this that, Kosuke has the reputation that he does, or excuse me, I guess I should say Tartarus. He has the reputation that he does, and that's one of never losing a team member. So obviously, there's this aspect of caring about the team is not just a directive coming from Kosuke, but it seems like it's a shared mindset with Doromon as well. And I like that. In addition to what I just like Logomon's response to, "You're rude but polite where it counts," Logomon said, reprising Doromon. And then lastly, I think it's really interesting how much of an influence that the professor has, since they being Doromon and Tartarus knew that the EG and Logomon were sent by the professor. Rather than being suspicious about that, for them that was a good thing. And the professor trusts these individuals, this team, and obviously we could trust them as well. They're obviously experienced and well versed enough that they're not going to be a burden. I'm really hopeful we're going to continue to learn more about the professor. At this point, I really don't think he's going to be an antagonistic force. But with that being said, I still do feel like there's a little bit of mystery surrounding him still. And the way that they've been introducing more elements, more information about the professor's character, I've been really appreciating that. Like e.g. the way that he was shocked at the end, excuse me. Wow, code, excuse me again, I accidentally unhighlighted my passage. While code cracking teams and Digimon respect the professor's instincts, no wonder they had welcomed him into the upper ranks so quickly, despite his inexperience and lack of accomplishments. I was quite surprised about that as well. Usually, I'm used to where one side has a higher up. They don't usually respect the other side's equally higher up. Right? What I mean by that is, if the good guys have a professor and the bad guys have a professor, those professors don't usually cooperate, and they usually have negative things to say about one another. But in this instance, we're seeing, oh, well, since the good guys work with this one individual, and the bad guys also are aware they're working with that one individual, no bad mouthing is going on at play right here. Rather, we take that as evidence that we could go ahead and trust you, at the very least, in terms of your work ethic. But yeah, moving forward, Tartarus, the Codecracker story, you mean, Doraemon clarified, a story that now involves you and Logomon, not to mention me. Wait, so everything's gone according to the SOC's plan? Ichi said, trying to jump ahead. I wouldn't go that far. All the necessary characters are in place, but we can't control the outcome, even if everyone plays their part, Doraemon said portentously. I can't pronounce this, excuse me, portentously. Portntously. Ichi felt like he had finally had something to Ichi felt like he had finally had something to grasp on as all this unfolded. He still didn't understand the big picture yet, but he finally put a finger on why he was so worrying of this Doraemon. It simply wasn't the fact that they were Tartarus' partner Digimon. It came down to the wit and will they possessed. He knew Digimon were creatures with personalities and free will in their own right, of course. The professor had disabused him of the notion they were mere AI, but there was something fiercely independent about this Digimon. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had their own goals in mind. Why else would they take such a lead role, leaving their human partner to just sit back and watch the show? So this one, there's two elements I want to focus on. I want to focus on the first portion first. So we obviously know, we being the audience, are kind of privy to what is the plan that Tartarus has in mind. We recall in that flashback where Tartarus utilized Doraemon, and they emphasized that they need to use another prototype Digimon, and they were thinking about Ryudomon and pointed out Logomon. Obviously, they need Logomon for whatever objective that is behind that wall, that barrier, whatever it may be. So we of the audience are aware about that, and so I wouldn't go that far. All the necessary characters are in place, so Logomon, Doraemon, Ryudomon, but we can't control the outcome, even if everyone plays their part. So that's really interesting to me. That tells me that they do have a plan about getting up to that barrier, but it's possible that they have a suspicion about what happens after that portion, after they enter the barrier or open the barrier, but they're not necessarily sure what will occur. That could be a bad thing, that could be a good thing. I'm looking forward to when we finally get to that part of the story. For the second part of this quote, so I do find it interesting that Iji seems to find Doraemon a little bit, I don't want to say untrustworthy, but just suspicious. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had their own goals in mind. Why else would they take such a lead role, leaving their human partner to just sit back and watch the show? I think this might be an instance of where Kosuke trusts Doraemon. Again, it's seeming like Kosuke is very much aligned with the professor when it comes to the mindset about Digimon and who they are as individuals. It seems like so far from these two groups, it's been these two characters specifically that always emphasize how Digimon are individuals. Kosuke not to the same extent as the professor, but again, I would argue that I think we have enough textual evidence to conclude that they both have the same mindset, the same conclusion about Digimon. And so, I think there's just a lot of trust. I was just rereading the quote. I think there's just a lot of trust present between Kosuke. He's able to just drink coffee because he's probably talked about his plans and his goals, objectives multiple times with Doraemon. And so Doraemon feels quite comfortable in knowing what it is that Kosuke is trying to achieve. Essentially, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that I don't think Doraemon is using Kosuke and vice versa as well. I don't think Kosuke is using Doraemon. I do believe that this is a partnership that's equal on both sides, where agency is not going to be dismissed. But I don't know what to make of the suspicious feelings that Ichi has of Doraemon. I don't think anything negative will come from this. but would it be surprising if maybe Doraemon, because again, these are prototype Digimon. It's been already established that prototype, not in the sense that they're not unlike other Digimon, just that they're a little bit older. Um, it was mentioned, I think, in the last part or two parts ago. So maybe Doraemon's aware about something about the digital world. Who knows, right? As we continue with the story, that might be revealed. But I do find that suspicion interesting. But I don't think anything bad will come from it. But I do think an interesting plot detail will emerge from it. Yeah, so I do like that. I also like how this is essentially emphasizes that despite the humans are working with the Digimon are again they're their own individuals. They're not codependent on their human partners. It's a fully realized human working with a fully realized Digimon. I just really appreciate that. Moving on to the next quote. That's where the SOC's true purpose lies. We aim to save those who have gone DMIA. That's the reason Toddlers established a team in the first place. That wasn't quite what EG expected to hear. Code cracking teams were usually formed to investigate something for a fee, or else for some other purpose that appealed to some ideal or other. At least, that was what EG thought they were built around. So it's not about freedom of the net or the digital world. Those are the code crackers' ideals, yes, but the core of the SOC is built around a much narrower vision. One shell with only a handful of people at the top, Marvin being one of them. Humans and Digimon may belong to completely different worlds, but we have agreed to work together to see this through, Doraemon said. So that I find this, we finally discovered the SOC's true objective. This all began because the professor hired EG and Logomon to figure out what was Toddler's objective, and now we know that it's dealing with DMIA, more specifically Saya. As the audience, we know that that's Koski's main objective, more than likely, and that's to rescue Saya wherever it is that may, whatever that may entail, because it's looking like that Black Agumon might be part of this as well, and yeah, I would argue this is more of a minor quote, but I think this adds more to the characterization of the individuals that are present in this story. And I would argue so. Now that we know the real objective, I could see one putting the argument forward that Koski is a selfish individual since he's created the SOC or Sons of Chaos. But even that name, right, Sons of Chaos. What's our objective? To save those who have gone into a coma, to save those who are DMIA. Well, it doesn't sound like it's going to encourage chaos, right? It may sound like at first Koski is using individuals, but I do believe that he is sincere when he says that the code crackers' ideals, that's an aspect that the SOC is keeping in mind, but their real objective is to free those who have been or who have fallen victim to whatever aspects that the digital world has to offer. So even though their goal is to rescue people, freedom on the net or in the digital world, I think that saying still applies here, because what is it that Koski is trying to do? Well, he wants the freedom to be able to save those that he's lost, to be able to regain the consciousness of the loved ones that encountered the digital world and try to figure out what exactly caused that loss in the first place, right? So even though it's a very personal objective, I do think it still goes aligned with the grander view of code crackers, the freedom of the net, the freedom of the digital world, freedom to do what? Well, exactly, whatever it is that one wants. So Sons of Chaos, that might be a inaccurate description of their group, right? Maybe they should have been called the Sons of Agency, right? The Sons of Free Will or something like that, right? And actually, now that we're talking about the name of the group, Sons of Chaos, usually when we think of agency and free will, that's usually closely coupled with chaos or destruction. I think that makes sense, right? Because when we're allowed to do what we want to do, some people are quite destructive, while others are quite protective. And so I don't think Sons of Chaos, I don't think that was an accident, despite their objective being positive. I think the reason that they're focusing on agency and freedom, that's what the Chaos name comes from. So even though their objective is to save people, at the end, Sons of Chaos, that's a monkey year that is not, it's too accurate of the group as a whole, right? Some people might join because they don't care about saving others, but what they do care about is being able to do what they want to do within the digital world, within the net, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Pardon me, I know I kind of went into a bit of a tangent, especially at the end, the realization that Chaos has some connection to agency and freedom. But yeah, let me make sure that's everything. And I also really like the last line: humans and Digimon may belong to completely different worlds, but we have agreed to work together to see this through. That again, it tells me Doromon, as EG pointed out, does he have his own separate independent go? Is he working with Kosuke because their objectives do align, but again, only aligns in terms of the process, but the end goes it's something different. They need to get through this gate for Kosuke to save Saya, but for Doromon, maybe there's something else that's going on beyond this gate. I think Doromon's being really interesting. He's being built up as a really interesting character. Up to this point, I would say that most of the interesting characters have been the human characters, and besides for Logomon. But at this point, the mystery that's surrounding Doromon, I would argue that Digimon are again becoming the more mysterious aspect of this story, or rather the more intriguing part of the story versus the humans. And what really quickly I'll explain what I mean by that. Up to this point in the story, I was really invested with the Professor's story, the Sons of Chaos, more specifically Tartarus / Kosuke's story, obviously Eiji and Leon's story, and even the Digipolice. I was really focused on these stories, and I knew that Digimon were part of the journey, but one is hopefully noticing, well, those are our human aspects that I was really looking forward to, right? This is the first part of the story where I'm thinking to myself, whoa, Doromon's being built up as to have this mysterious objective, this mysterious go. What is it about Doromon, right? So I'm finding him to be the focal point of my interest this time. And then lastly, the last quote, but certainly not least. Okay, so let's go back to something you said earlier. I've been told that Tartarus never let anyone go DMIA on his missions, but earlier you told me you've been through what I'm going through, that someone went DMIA and it was your fault. Yes, his reputation precedes him, but that is a misunderstanding, one that gives too much credit, Tartarus said, stepping on his Digimon's explanation. Iji sat quietly, waiting for someone to speak. I was the first person to lose someone in the digital world. I became a meticulous planner in order to avoid making the same mistake twice. That kind of behavior, earns people a reputation. Tell me more, Iji said. Tartarus fixed him with a steely gaze that softened into a hint of pain. As much as you're comfortable with, he added, trying to gauge the man's reaction. Tartarus agreed to tell his story. Iji figured this was his plan all along. What else could possibly have brought him to Iji's door? And that's where part 10 ends. I love how Tartarus seems to he seems to be very accountable. He's built up his reputation that no one under his leadership goes DMIA, and he could choose to go ahead and let that reputation to stand, but obviously he corrects that, right? I love how he interrupts Doromon and he says that is a misunderstanding, one that gives me too much credit. He obviously, I would argue, if you could ask Kosuke what he feels about that detail about him, that no one goes DMIA under him, he probably doesn't like that idea. It probably gives him a little bit of pain. Why pain? Well, because it reminds him of his quote-unquote failure. The fact that when they first did Operation Tartarus to begin with Saya and Yolene, well, someone that he did love and care for did go DMIA. So I just really like how there's a lot of accountability being shown with Tartarus' character right here. It's a misunderstanding, one that gives me too much credit. But I would also argue that he's taking too much of the burden, right? We haven't really talked about this, but the fact that he takes the name Tartarus when that was the operation where he lost his loved one, I would argue that that's him taking up more burden than he needs to. Again, he's blaming himself when he probably shouldn't be blaming himself as much as he should. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And I also like this line. I was the first person to lose someone in the digital world. I became a meticulous planner in order to avoid making the same mistake twice. Again, I think that really showcases the care that Kosuke has. He became a meticulous planner with new groups that he was working with, not just with the previous groups. And despite that, if Kosuke didn't care, he wouldn't put as much effort with the new groups that he did with the older groups, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Let me rephrase that. If Kosuke was able to continue doing missions with Yolene and the professor, I would argue he's going to be much more careful with what he does because of what happened to Saya. But after Kosuke leaves and starts joining new groups, new teams of individuals that he's working with, he could disregard them, right? Well, you guys aren't people that I personally know. I barely met you, so why should I be as meticulous? Rather, I'd argue that's looking like he was not like that. Rather, Koski went, okay, maybe I just met you, but the same techniques that I used to keep my old team safe, we're going to continue applying that here because I don't want anyone to go DMIA, even if I know you personally or if I don't know you personally. Again, that really shows that Koski is a good leadership, or at least he has leadership qualities that should be emulated, and that again, he's a caring individual. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to the next part. It's looking like we're going to go to the past a little bit. Are we? Because we already got the backstory when it comes to Saya. So I'm quite curious. Maybe the next part, it is looking like we're going to go into another flashback of the next part. But we might, instead of going all the way back, we might be going up to the point, what did Koski do after Saya went DMIA? Where did he come up to create the Sons of Chaos? What did he do to, what convinced him to use Tartarus, a operation name, as his own personal name for the digital world? Just so, I'm not gonna lie, I am looking forward to that, but at the same time, I'm also not looking forward to another flashback after we just got back to the modern story to begin with. But hopefully, if we do go into a flashback, it won't be as long. It will just be that part, so part 11, or better yet, maybe half of part 11, and then there'll be a page break, and we'll come back. We, being the audience, will come back to EG, Koski, Doromon, and Logomon on EG's little flat. So thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Did you guys read this part as well? Are you excited that we're finally back in the present point, but also disappointed it's looking like we're going to go back into the past? My question for everyone is going to be, what do you think about Doromon? For me personally, so as I said already, Logomon reminds me of Terriermon, but with a little bit more agency. Doraemon's kind of reminded me of Guilmon a little bit, just because I don't know why, but when I read Doraemon, I read him as a polite and also soft-spoken kind of Digimon, and that kind of reminds me a little bit of Guilmon. So, personally for me, I am enjoying Doraemon's characterization. So again, to reiterate, my question for everyone is, what do you think about Doraemon? Are you enjoying how he is so far? I am aware that besides for Digimon X, I believe that CGI movie is called, Doraemon's only been also in Digimon World 3, that one video game. You could pick him. I don't think he's ever been a protagonist in anything else, so it's really cool to see Doraemon, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about Ryodomon as well. Though I am aware that Ryodomon was present in Ghost games, so yeah, again, thanks for joining me, everyone. I do appreciate it. Have a prodigious day, and take care.